The day I signed away the last piece of land my husband ever touched, my parents showed up in a rental car with matching luggage and smiles I hadn't seen in 6 years. I remember standing just outside the notary's office in downtown Kelowna, holding a folder thick with papers, and watching my mother step out of that car in her cream-colored blazer like she was arriving at a garden party. My father adjusted his tie. They both looked up at me at the same time, and my mother tilted her head the way she always did when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. I didn't say a word. I just watched them walk toward me across the parking lot, and I thought about the last time I'd seen those faces, standing in the doorway of their house in Mississauga while I stood outside in February with my dog in my arms and nowhere to go. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Hadley. I'm 31 years old, and 2 years ago I sold a 47-acre property and its associated business license for just under $6 million. I gave almost none of it to my family. This is why. I met my husband when I was 23, working the front desk of a veterinary clinic outside of Guelph. He came in one afternoon carrying a half-feral cat he'd found behind the dumpster at his job site, wrapped in his work jacket. The cat bit him twice before we even got her into an exam room. He apologized to her every time she hissed. I knew right then his name was Emmett. He was a carpenter by trade, quiet in the way that people who actually listen tend to be quiet. He grew up in a small town in the Okanagan, and his parents, I'll call them his mum and his dad, because that's genuinely how I thought of them even before we were married, ran a property outside Kelowna where they'd kept horses for 30 years. Not a tourist operation, not a fancy riding school, just a working property. Hay fields, a small barn, 3 aging quarter horses, and a house that needed a new roof. Emmett and I got married when I was 25, small ceremony at a conservation area near Hamilton. My parents came, my sister came. My mother wore a dress she described twice as more formal than the occasion probably called for. My father gave a toast that was mostly about himself. Emmett's parents cried. His mum squeezed my face between her hands afterward and said, "You're ours now." I laughed. I didn't understand yet how much she meant it. For the first 2 years we were happy in an ordinary way. We rented a small house. I kept working at the clinic. Emmett took on contracts. We had a rescue greyhound named Biscuit. Actually, I should use a different name. We called him Fig. A tall, skinny, anxious dog who had to sleep with one paw touching either me or Emmett at all times, or he would pace all night. Then Emmett started getting headaches. He dismissed them for months. You know how men are, or maybe you don't, and I shouldn't generalize, but Emmett had a particular stubbornness about anything that might require him to sit still. He kept working. He kept lifting things he shouldn't have been lifting. He took ibuprofen by the handful and called it fine. By the time he agreed to see someone, the headaches had become something else. Pressure behind his eyes, losing words mid-sentence. A morning in March when he couldn't remember how to get to a job site he'd driven to every day for 3 weeks. The neurologist used the word glioblastoma in a windowless office on the 4th floor of a hospital in Hamilton. I held Emmett's hand so hard I left marks. Treatment was possible, the survival statistics were not good. The cost of everything, medications not fully covered. The nutritional supplements his oncologist recommended, the 3-hour round trips to a specialist in Toronto every 2 weeks. The weeks Emmett couldn't work started to compound almost immediately. We weren't poor, but we weren't people who had money set aside for something like this. Nobody that age is. I called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring. I explained everything, the diagnosis, the prognosis, what we were facing financially. I wasn't asking for a check. I was asking if they could help us with even 1 month's rent while I took unpaid leave to be with him full-time. They owned their house outright. My father had retired from a management position at a manufacturing firm in Brampton. I knew they had savings. My mother said, "Hadley, we have our own expenses." I said, "Mom, I'm not asking you to pay for his treatment. I'm asking for $800. She said she'd have to talk to my father. She never called back. My sister, she's 3 years older. Always been the one my parents looked at the way people look at the fridge when they're proud of how organized it is. My sister texted me a week later to say that the timing was really hard for the whole family, and she hoped things would look up soon. She included a heart emoji. I didn't respond. Emmett's parents drove from Kelowna to Hamilton in 2 days. His mum showed up at our door with a casserole, a check, and absolutely no commentary about whether the timing was good for them. His dad shook Emmett's hand for a long time without saying anything, And then he went outside and sat in the truck for a while, and I think he cried, though he would never have admitted it. They stayed for 3 weeks the first time, then went home, then came back. They paid for 2 months of our rent and never mentioned it again. His mum came to every Toronto appointment she could make it to. She sat in waiting rooms and brought terrible coffee from the machines in the hallway and was simply steadily there. Emmett died 14 months after the diagnosis. He was 30 years old. He died in the palliative care ward of a hospital in Hamilton on a Tuesday morning in late November, and outside the window the sky was that flat grey particular to southern Ontario in the fall, and the tree in the courtyard had dropped most of its leaves, and I remember thinking that it was the most ordinary-looking day for the worst day of my life. His parents were there. My parents were not. They came to the funeral. My mother wore black and cried visibly. My father shook hands with people at the reception. My sister stood near the food table and told someone, I heard her, that Emmett had fought so hard. She had visited him once in 14 months. The day after the funeral, I drove to my parents' house because I didn't know what else to do. I had no plan. I had a greyhound, a storage unit, and the name of an estate lawyer Emmett's family had recommended. I knocked on my parents' door. My mother opened it. She looked at me, looked at the dog, and said, Hadley, this really isn't a good time. Your aunt and uncle are coming on the weekend and the guest room is already set up. I stood there in the cold for probably 10 seconds. Then I got back in the car. I drove the 4 hours to Kelowna in one go, stopping only once for gas and to let Fig walk around a rest stop for a few minutes. I called Emmett's mum from the highway. She picked up on the first ring. I said, Is it okay if I come for a while? She said the room is already made up. I spent the first month just existing. His parents didn't ask me to be productive or cheerful or to have a plan. His mum made coffee every morning and left it on the counter. His dad fixed the fence posts in the back field and asked me sometimes if I wanted to help, and sometimes I did, and we worked alongside each other without talking much, and it helped more than anything else that month. The property had 3 horses at that point. One of them, a bay mare named after a place in Ireland his mum had visited once, had started limping. I'd kept up my veterinary assistant certification, and I started helping with her care. That was how it started. I began reaching out to local vets about boarding horses for rehabilitation. One connection led to another. By the end of my first year in Kelowna, I was managing 4 horses in recovery, all boarded on the property, all under a vet's care, with me doing the daily monitoring and treatment logging. By the end of the second year, the rehab operation had a waiting list. Emmett's parents gave me the land. I want to be clear about this because I was, for a long time, uncomfortable talking about it. They didn't lend it to me. They didn't make me a business partner with complicated paperwork. His dad sat me down at the kitchen table one evening and said, We want you to have the property. We're going to keep the house. We've got years left in us yet, but the fields and the barn should be yours. I cried. I protested. His mum told me to stop arguing. I registered the business, Equine Recovery Okanagan. It's not a glamorous name. It works. Over the next 4 years, I say we because his parents were still there, still part of it, his dad driving the truck to pick up horses when I couldn't, his mum handling the administrative end she'd quietly taught herself, built it into something I hadn't dared to imagine. I hired a farrier, then a part-time vet tech, then another. We renovated the barn, we added 4 stalls and a proper medical observation area. I developed a referral network with equine vets across the province. I gave talks at 2 agricultural conferences. I wrote a piece for a BC farming publication about rehabilitation protocols that someone actually cited in a journal. In the late fall of my 6th year on the property, I received an approach from a land development company based in Calgary. They were acquiring agricultural properties in the Okanagan corridor. They wanted to know if I would consider selling. The number they opened with was $3.2 million. After 8 months of negotiation, including 2 periods where I walked away entirely and they came back, we settled at $5.8 million. I did not tell my family, I should say. I had not spoken to my parents in just under 4 years. There had been 2 attempts on their end, a Christmas card my 2nd year in Kelowna, which arrived with no note inside, just their names signed, and a voicemail from my mother in the spring of my 4th year saying she hoped I was doing well out there, in a tone that made it sound like I had relocated to a remote colony on another planet. I didn't return either. My sister had reached out once, about 3 years after I'd left Ontario, via Instagram. A direct message that said, "Heard you're doing well, we should catch up sometime eng." I left it on read, so I don't know how they found out. My best guess is a mutual family friend who had seen some local coverage. There was a small feature in a regional paper about the sale, framed as a story about a woman who had built an equine rehabilitation business and sold to developers. It mentioned Kelowna. That was probably enough. The week before closing, my mother called my cell phone from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up by accident. She said, "Hadley, it's Mom." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I know." She said she'd seen something about a property sale. She said it sounded like I'd done wonderfully, and she was so proud. She said she and my father had been thinking about coming out to see me. She said my sister was going through a difficult time. Her and her husband were renewing their vows, which apparently involved a venue deposit of $12,000 that they were struggling to come up with. And she wondered if I was in a position to help family. I listened to all of this. Then I said, "I'll think about it." I told them closing was the following Friday and they could come if they wanted. I already knew what I was going to do. The day of closing, I woke up before 5. I made coffee and stood in the barn for an hour. There were 6 horses in the facility that morning, all in various stages of recovery, all of whom would be transferred to a partner operation south of Vernon that I'd spent 8 months vetting before I'd agreed to sell. I'd made it a condition of the sale. The developer had thought that was unusual. I didn't care. I walked each horse. I stopped at the bay mare, not the original. She'd passed away 2 years prior, but a roan gelding we'd taken in the previous spring with a fractured splint bone. I stood with him for a long time. He was calm in a way horses only are when nothing is being asked of them. His parents arrived at 8:30. His mum brought a thermos of coffee and sandwiches she'd made at 6 in the morning, because she thought we might not have time to eat. His dad wore his good jacket. They looked, both of them, the way people look when they are doing their best not to cry. My parents arrived at 9:45 in a rental Hyundai. My mother was in the cream blazer. My father had a tie. My sister had not come, though I hadn't expected her. The notary's office was a 20-minute drive. My in-laws and I rode together. My parents followed. The signing itself was unremarkable in the way that enormous legal moments usually are. A lot of paper, a lot of initials, a notary explaining things in a methodical voice, while everyone pretended they hadn't read the documents already. The developer's representative shook everyone's hand at the end. She had a firm grip and she looked at me with what I think was genuine respect. I appreciated it. Afterward, we stood in the parking lot in the October sun, that particular Okanagan light that is gold and thin and makes everything look slightly more meaningful than it is. My mother started. "Hadley," I said, "can you give me 1 minute?" I turned to his parents. I had prepared something. I had written it down and then thrown it away and decided to just say it. I said, "You took me in when my own family closed the door. You gave me land. You gave me years. You showed me what it looks like when people love someone without keeping a ledger. I don't have the words for what that is worth, so instead I have this." I handed his dad an envelope. They had not been part of the sale. The land was legally mine. They'd transferred it to me fully, no conditions. They'd received nothing from the transaction. Inside the envelope was a certified check for $1.2 million. His mum made a sound I'd never heard her make before. His dad looked at the check for a long moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Hadley, this is," I said, "please don't argue. I already know what you're going to say." His mum put her arms around me. She held on for a long time. She smelled like the kitchen in the house I'd come to think of as home, like coffee and something faintly herbaceous, and I let myself just stand there and be held. When I turned around, my parents were still standing by their rental car. My mother's face had done something I didn't have a word for. It wasn't quite shock. It was more like watching someone recalculate in real time. Her eyes moving between me and his parents and the notary's office behind us, doing arithmetic on something she thought she already understood. My father said, that was very generous of you, Hadley." I looked at him. I said, "Yes, it was." My mother said carefully, "We were thinking we might stay for a few days, spend some time. It's been so long since." I said, "I'm flying to Halifax on Sunday. I'm taking some time before I figure out what's next, but I'm glad you came today," she said. "And for your sister." I said, "Mom." She stopped. I said, "I love you. I think in whatever way you're capable of, you love me too. But I have spent a lot of years waiting for that to feel like something. And what I've learned is that love that only shows up when there's something in it for the person giving it. That's not the kind I'm building my life on anymore. My father opened his mouth. I'll never know what he was going to say. I said, drive safe going back. The highway through the canyon can get icy this time of year. I hugged my mother, briefly, but I meant it. She was stiff with surprise. I shook my father's hand. Then I walked to his parents' truck and got in the back seat, and his dad drove us back to the property for the last time. His mom made dinner that night. Roast chicken, which had been Emmett's favorite. We ate at the kitchen table and talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with money. About a trip his parents had always wanted to take to Prince Edward Island. About the Roan gelding's recovery. About what Fig had done to a throw pillow earlier that week. His dad told a story I'd heard before about a horse he'd had at 20 years old, and I let him tell it again because I wanted to hear it. Before I left for the airport, his mum handed me a small card. On the front was a photo of the bay mare from years ago, standing in the field in the summer. On the inside she had written, Emmett would be so proud, so are we. I kept it together until I was in the car. I have moved a few times since then. I've consulted for other equine rehabilitation operations. I'm writing a manual on recovery protocols for sport horses that 3 vets have asked to review before I publish it. I have a smaller property now, just outside Wolfville, Nova Scotia. Enough space for Fig and 2 horses I've committed to for the rest of their lives. My parents and I have a relationship of sorts. It's careful. There are phone calls at Christmas. My mother asks about the horses. My father has stopped making toasts at family gatherings about himself, or at least he's gotten more subtle about it. My sister got married again. The vow renewal happened, venue deposit and all, funded by some arrangement I've chosen not to inquire about. I don't carry anger about any of it anymore, or not much. There are still moments, a particular quality of winter light, the way Fig presses against my leg when he senses I'm tired, the feeling of a horse leaning into a hand that it's decided to trust. When I feel the weight of how much I almost didn't have, how close I came to building a life in a direction that would have required me to be small. Emmett's parents drove out to Nova Scotia last August. They stayed for 2 weeks. His mum painted a watercolor of the property from the back field. His dad fixed a drainage issue on the north side of the barn that I'd been ignoring for a season. On the last night we sat outside until it was fully dark. The sky in Nova Scotia in August is a particular kind of dark, full and dense, the stars closer looking than they have any right to be. His dad said, he'd have liked it here. I said, yeah, he would have. We sat there for a while longer. Then his mum said it was getting cold and she was going in, and did anyone want tea? And his dad said yes, and I said yes, and we went inside. That was enough. It was, and continues to be, exactly enough.